Hey everyone, this is Louis7 and I have another video kind of reviewing the legendary servers in the Lord of the Rings Online, and in this one I want to talk more about what changes LOTRO needs for the legendary server experience. So the gameplay will be on my Warden on Anor. I'm still just working on leveling her up. But first off, I am having a ton of fun on Anor despite these issues I'll get to. The server has been pretty awesome and enjoyable. So the first change LOTRO needs is a normalization of gear and to make gear more consistent, especially while leveling, but even at endgame. And this part is going to be a bit long since there is really a lot involved in this. So right now gear is just very inconsistent, and if you are unfamiliar, update 23 changed the way stats work. So primary stats except vitality are much less useful and provide a lower amount of damage increase through physical or tactical mastery, and that isn't inherently a problem if the gear you acquire through leveling even at endgame reflected these changes, because when they made that update they were supposed to actually increase the stats on all pieces of gear to basically, I think the idea was to make leveling and your damage as you progress more smooth, but it definitely hasn't felt that way. So the problem is that some gear does scale the stats well, and those gear pieces that seem extremely strong due to their insane looking stats now are actually just like the new normal, and then the gear that doesn't scale well looks horrible, which it kind of is. So gear you acquire while leveling especially has this problem where some pieces and quest rewards are updated to have normal big stats, but some pieces aren't. For example, on my Warden, I got a level 12 chest piece with 6 agility as a quest reward, and then right next to it there is a looted chest piece that is the same quality with 12 agility. It's also the same level 12. And I have encountered examples like this plenty of times on my Lore Master in particularly. Some pieces will just have a few will, while others have like a ton of fate, for example, and that one's particularly frustrating because I don't really want fate at all on my Lore Master. But so I could go on and on with these examples, but hopefully you get the idea here that stats just don't really scale well on gear. To get an idea of gear with stats that scale well, you can look at the medium armor boxes and some quest rewards that they're geared more towards Bjornings if you have seen those, and you can look at those stats. And those are actually the baseline stats that I think other gear pieces should be compared to. And I would like to see the stats normalized across all gear pieces in at least the level 1 through 50 range. I'm actually not sure if the problem is past level 50 to be honest, but as far as the legendary servers go, above 50 is currently irrelevant, but it will become relevant at some point in the future, so if those do need updating as well, I would like to see that. And I don't think that some pieces can't be slightly better than others, but just having these huge inconsistencies that there are now just makes gearing while leveling feel really bad. The second change LOTRO needs is right in line with the first change actually. I would like to see crafted gear be normalized and made more useful, so some crafted gear, like the other gear I just talked about, does not scale well, while other crafted gear does. So metalsmith right now appears to be the only profession that makes gear that scales well. So that leaves tailors, jewelers, weaponsmiths, and woodworkers. I think that's all the other ones that make actual like pieces of gear that doesn't scale well. And metalsmiths, heavy armor, and even class items just have way more stats than tailor or jeweler crafted light and medium armor, and the jewelry from jeweler and the class items, all those make as well. And I put up a direct comparison on screen of a level 15 chest pieces for the heavy and medium and light armor. The medium light being from the tailor have way less stats than the heavy armor. They actually have less than a third. And yeah, the heavy armor, as you can see, is just significantly better, and I think it's really crazy. And I don't have them up here, but the jewelry and the stats on the weapons made by woodworkers and weaponsmiths are more in line with the two tailor pieces on the left. So I do want to mention that I don't necessarily want crafted gear sets to be overpowered and that just be everything everybody runs like it used to be before update 23, but I would still like to see them be viable, and maybe they could put them a slight step down from quest rewards so you can continually get upgrades while you have crafted gear to fill in gaps. But even more so, I would just like for all the professions to be brought in line with each other so the stuff they make is at the same power level between all the professions. And I think scaling the stats of all the non-metalsmith professions would be the best option there. So the third change LOTRO needs is also about gear, and this should be telling you all that this is a big issue in the servers, but don't worry, we will get to some different and exciting changes later on that I have in mind. But gear from Skirmish Camp does not scale well either, and I think this gear also needs to be normalized. The regular Skirmish barter gear doesn't need to be overpowered, but I think it should be brought more in line, at least with where stats are now. That gear was never the best, and it still doesn't need to be the best in my opinion, but I'd still like it as an option to fill gaps in my pieces of gear. Additionally, the gear from the classic vendor also doesn't scale well, and I think that could use a touch-up along with all the other pieces of gear and gear types I talked about. One note from the classic vendor is some of the gear is actually locked, which is in the level 20 to 40 range, but I'll get more on that later actually in the next change, which is the fourth change. So in this one, I think LOTRO needs is to make more instances more rewarding, especially at low levels. So to give some context on this issue is low-level instances like Great Barrow give no loot besides money and bounties, which you can only use the bounties to sell them to a vendor anyway, so you basically only get money and no loot through the entire instance of Great Barrow and other low-level ones like it. So that just really feels awful and unrewarding, and in fact it discourages me from running instances since I get no sense of value from my time from running them. And the whole point of these servers is actually for the fresh start and to encourage running instances together with people. So I would like to get more out of instances, at least some loot, but what I would really like to see is for gear to drop in instances again. Right now instance gear only drops in level 40 and above instances, and below that you get nothing again. Why should some random Lowlands boar drop cool hats, robes, or weapons for me, my lore master in particular, while Sambrog, the ruler of the Great Barrows, drops nothing, or even any of the other bosses or other mobs in the instance? Even if some of the old gear is in the classic vendor from the skirmish camp, those pieces don't scale well and don't have everything there used to be. Plus the Great Barrow treasure pieces like I talked about are locked right now, even though there is actually plenty in the level to 20-40 range in that section. There's actually the same issue with some of the other sections. I don't know them off the top of my head right now, but if you look at the classic vendor, you will see some sections for the gear that seem like they should be available for below 50 because that's when the content was released, but you can't barter for them. This part could also just help with the gearing issues and inconsistencies while leveling that I talked about for the first three changes. Okay, the fifth change LOTRO needs is to make reputation feel a little bit more rewarding while leveling, but very importantly to not make it feel required, especially at high levels or the level caps will level cap 50 right now, or future level caps we'll get to in the legendary servers. And this one I actually get to bring up gear again because a lot of reputation gear doesn't scale well or is just kind of bad for how much reputation it requires, so I would like to see slightly easier access to better reputation gear, and this could really, I think, just provide players a fun alternative to crafting, deeding, or running instances to get gear while leveling, or even at the level cap. And again, I want to emphasize that this gear does not need to be OP, especially at the level caps where reputation can sometimes feel required. I don't want reputation to feel required. And I think that's a really big problem now with a lot of the recent updates, level caps in the regular servers. The sixth change LOTRO needs is to work on the virtue system, and this is actually a much broader issue I have with LOTRO, but virtues just feel clunky and awkward while leveling, and even more so actually as you get to the level caps, I think. I kind of like having virtues available, giving my character kind of passive stat boost, but the fact that deeds are the only way to get them really feels bad to me. If you don't grind deeds while leveling, you'll get way behind and have to do a lot of catch-up grinding on old content to be on par with other players who actually have their virtues up. So what I would really like to see here is an alternative way to get virtues. They could simply make virtue ranks barterable at skirmish camps or even some reputation vendors for rep tokens, or just some alternative that's not necessarily just the LOTRO store. But this would still allow players who like doing deeds could still get value out of doing their deeds, while other players at in-game do have some other options for something to do to actually progress with their character while playing the game in the way they enjoy, which might not necessarily be deeding. So the next two changes I have are outlooks for the future, and the seventh change overall is LOTRO needs to rework the way you get class trait points. At higher levels, you can get them from doing specific quest sets and storylines, and players who don't do those, kind of like me, leave their character significantly weaker by not having as many trait points. And it's also, I think, just a very unfun and uninteractive way of gaining trait points. And I think there are actually a few options for solutions here. I think the best option would actually be to add just more ways to get trait points, but importantly set caps on how many you can have based on your level. Another option is they could just give them to you only through leveling and maybe keep the class stage ones still available because those are kind of fun, requiring you to use skills and give you something other than just leveling to get your trait points, but definitely not locking them behind quests. And yeah, I just think having trait points locked behind quests like they do at later levels is a really bad system and feels awful as you get to high level again. This also isn't relevant for the legendary servers right now, which I think is very thankfully because it's one of the reasons I'm actually enjoying them so much, but for the future I think this change really needs to happen, and I think it would benefit the regular servers a lot as well. In fact, I feel like I could make a whole other video on this issue because it is one of my biggest issues in the game as a whole. But anyway, I'll go ahead and get on to the 8th and final change I have that LOTRO needs, and this one again is an outlook for the future and dealing with legendary items. So I don't have a perfect solution to this, but right now the system just feels clunky while leveling and even a little bit clunky at high level. But you get some like all-powerful legendary weapon, and then you get one that's like one level higher so you can get a little more DPS on it, so you replace your old one and just kind of destroy it. And that just doesn't really feel right to me. I think I've seen other players have similar feelings towards that. But this one, again, is a touchy subject, but one option I would like to see is imbuement actually begin available at level 50. So from here you would keep your same LI all the way through once you get level like kind of 50 and get your first LI from Walls of Moria. And I would think this change could actually be the best for LOTRO because it would fix all the issues the game has at higher levels with imbued allies. So if you're unfamiliar, at level 100 you can become insanely strong just by applying Starlit Crystals to your weapon and basically have a level 120 weapon at level 100. At the same time, if you don't upgrade your LI, you'll basically have a level 100 weapon at level 120, which does barely any damage or makes your tactical skills do barely any damage. And again, with this issue, I can make a whole other video going on it and making suggestions for changes or how I would ideally have the system. But kind of the point of this is if you make imbuement available at level 50, you can change the way the LI upgrading system works to make it much more smooth and consistent as you level up and just feel better to players, I think, as they level up and generally become more powerful characters. And again, I won't go into exact details that I can think of for this change because there could easily be another video on that. But another option I did list is to make it more worthwhile when you discard old legendary items or ones you don't need instead of just destroying or filtering them, which I do because it becomes a bigger problem, especially at higher levels. But basically, allies just feel clunky, and as the legendary servers progress to Moria and beyond, LOTRO could really use a change, I think, or even just some minor changes to the way upgrading LIs work. So those are the big 8 changes I think LOTRO needs for the legendary servers. There are some other changes I think the game could use, like class balance, but those aren't really more specific towards the legendary servers. These are more broad game issues that really impact the legendary servers, I think. And just to recap, the first 3 were gear and stat related, which is really big concern right now, and just to make those more consistent. And the 4th was on instances being more rewarding because I'm discouraged to run them right now. And the 5th was on reputation, 6th is on the virtue system, and then the last 2 were for the legendary servers as they progress into the future on the topic of class trait points and the legendary item system. So I hope you all did enjoy this video, and I would love to hear some feedback on this type of video. Like, any feedback you have is appreciated, and I would actually really love to hear some changes you all think LOTRO needs or what you think of the changes I listed throughout this video. And if you did enjoy, please do consider liking and subscribing for more, and thanks for watching, everyone.